The Buddhists propose that our true self is our intellect or consciousness. This is based on spiritual teachings that indicate there is something beyond our physical self, a deeper consciousness within us. They argue that just like any tool needs someone to operate it, our mind and senses also need an inner self, which is the intellect or consciousness. And we feel this is true when we think of ourselves as the ones doing things or experiencing pleasure or pain. And the Yogacara, a Buddhist school of thought, takes this further by saying that only consciousness or a continuous flow of ideas is real. They believe everything else that we think exists is non-existent. This means our usual understanding of the world and ourselves as physical entities is, according to them, mistaken. The Prabhakaras and the Tarkikas, followers of Mimansa philosophy different from the Buddhists, argue that the true self is ignorance, which is a state of not knowing or a lack of awareness. They use spiritual texts as evidence, which suggests that there's an aspect of the self deeper than consciousness that is associated with bliss. They also point out that in deep sleep, when we aren't aware of anything, our intellect and sense of identity seem to dissolve into this state of ignorance. This is further supported by our own statements, like, I don't know or I lack knowledge. The idea here is that the self exists even in the absence of conscious thought or knowledge, suggesting that it's this fundamental ignorance or blissful state that's our true self, especially since it's present during deep dreamless sleep when the intellect fades. The Bhattas, other followers of different Mimansa philosophy, propose that the true self is consciousness mixed with ignorance. They cite spiritual teachings that during deep dreamless sleep, the self exists in a state of undifferentiated consciousness, filled with bliss. This view suggests that in such a state of sleep, where we aren't actively thinking or dreaming, both awareness and unawareness are present within us. They argue that this duality is essential to our self-identity, as we often have experiences of not knowing or understanding ourselves. Essentially, the school believes that the self is a combination of knowing and not knowing, conscious and unconscious aspects, especially evidenced by the content and experience of deep sleep, where the self is not actively perceiving or distinguishing things, but still exists in a blissful state. The Madhyamika school of Buddhism holds that the self and everything else is essentially void or empty. This perspective draws on teachings that state before creation, right? There was nothing, no names, no forms, just non-existence. They argue that during deep sleep, when we're not dreaming or thinking, we experience a similar void because we're not aware of anything. When someone wakes from such a sleep, they might feel as if they hadn't existed during that time. This Buddhist school takes Buddha's words quite literally, asserting that ultimately everything is void, meaning that what we consider the self doesn't have an independent, permanent, or substantial nature. And today we've navigated through profound, like philosophical waters, examining various interpretations of the self. Buddhists emphasize the intellect or consciousness as the core of our being, suggesting that this consciousness is the only reality, while everything else is an illusion. In contrast, the Prabhakaras and Tarkikas is view ignorance, or the absence of knowledge, as the true self, a notion echoed during the bliss of deep, dreamless sleep. The Bhattas offer a synthesis, seeing the self as a mix of consciousness and ignorance, both present in the serenity of dreamless sleep. They propose a self that encompasses both knowing and not knowing. And finally, the Madhyamika Buddhists present a radical view. Everything, including the self, is void. And they believe that in states like deep sleep, we encounter this void, suggesting our usual perception of existence is a misconception. Each school provides a unique lens, offering rich insights into the complex tapestry of the self,